Merry Christmas to everyone! This is from Peaky Boardgamer, and today I will teach you a very popular game, which is Ark Nova, a game for 1 to 4 players that plays in about 2 hours. Before we go on with the rules, I want to remind you that there is an active worldwide giveaway for the celebration of our 3,000 subscribers, so if you want to take part and win a copy of Terraforming Mars Ares Expedition, follow the link, subscribe and write a comment in the comment section. This video is not gonna be short, so let's move to the table and see how Ark Nova is played. In Ark Nova, players are managers of a modern zoo park. Each player has their own zoo map and 5 action cards with which they perform various tasks. Acquire new cards from the board, play them in their play area, construct various buildings and enclosures, or use their assistance to gain partner zoos and universities, make donations and support projects. Through certain ways, players can flip their action cards, offering an improved version of the specific action. The player's main goal is to make their conservation marker moving clockwise on a track meet with their appeal marker, which moves counterclockwise in another track. When one of the players achieves that, then the game's end is triggered and we move to scoring. After scoring, the players whose markers have the greatest distance after having crossed will win in a game of Ark Nova. At first, place the board in the middle of the table and the 2 component trays within players' reach. Then shuffle all the zoo cards and create a face-down stack in this space here. Then place 1 face-down card to each one of the 6 spaces that I show you. Place the break marker on the break track depending on your player count. In my 2 players example, I will place the marker here. Shuffle the bonus tiles and randomly fill the 4 bonus spaces of the conservation track. Place the tiles facing upwards and the remaining tiles are not used and return to the box. Next, place the association board next to the main board and create face-down supplies with the final scoring cards and the 12 base conservation project cards. After you shuffle the decks, place 1 conservation card in the 3 first spaces beneath the association board. Fill the 4th space only in a 4 players game. The association board has specific areas for partner zoos and universities. Place the appropriate components in their corresponding spaces. Conservation project cards have 3 levels of objectives in their bottom part. If this is a 2 players game only, then you take cubes of an unused color and you cover the 1st level on the 1st card, the 2nd level on the 2nd card, and the 3rd level on the 3rd card. You also take another 3 cubes and you cover the left 3 spaces of the donation area. Each player takes a personal zoo board, and it is advised that in your first games all players take the ones that depict Map A. These are all the same for all players. In later games you can use boards that are different for each player. Then you must read any special rules written here, which in this case is to place a 3-size enclosure here and a kiosk here. Standard enclosures have 2 sides. The yellow side means that the enclosure is empty, and this is the side you will be using here. The other side of kiosks is pavilions, which is a completely different building. Players select a color and take all the components of the corresponding color. Each player has 4 assistants. 1 goes here as available, and the rest 3 are placed here. These are locked and can be unlocked throughout the game. Then players take cube markers and place 1 of them to each of the 7 spaces I show you here. Remaining cubes are placed next to the player's board. Each player starts the game with 25 money from the supply, which is placed here on the notepad. Players take a set of 5 different action cards: animals, build, association, sponsors and cards. These cards are double-sided, with the red side being the upgraded one. Players start with the blue side and place the animals action in the 1st space of this track. Then they shuffle the rest cards and randomly place them in the rest 4 slots. Players then take 2 score cards from the supply, as well as 8 zoo cards. Players can examine their cards, but keep them secret from their opponents. After players examine their zoo cards, they must choose 4 of them to keep and 4 to discard. Cards are always discarded in this space on the left side of the main board. You can keep the stack facing upwards, however players may not examine the contents of the stack. After all players have chosen their 4 initial zoo cards, you can flip the 6 zoo cards on the main board facing upwards. The game uses 3 different tracks and players have 1 marker for each one. The first one is the green conservation track. Players place their marker in space 0 of this track. Throughout the game, players are moving clockwise in this track. The second one is the reputation track. Players place their marker in space 1 of this track. The last one is the appeal track. It's this ticket-like track in which players will be moving in a counterclockwise direction. After you choose a random player to be the starting player, that player will place their marker in space 0 of the appeal track. Then, moving in a clockwise order, the second player will place it in space 1, the third one in space 2, and if there are 4 players, in space 3. The game is now ready to start. The game is played in player turns, starting with the first player and continuing clockwise indefinitely until the game's end is triggered. Certain player actions will move the break marker to the left. Once the marker reaches this space, the game is paused, and this process is triggered mainly to give income to the players and discard excess cards. Then the marker is reset and the game continues. On their turn, players must select and perform one of their action cards. The number above the action card is very important because the higher the number, the more powerful the action will be. After selecting an action, a player can boost the value with any number of cross tokens they might have in their supply. For each token used, the power is increased by 1 point. You can even exceed 5 power if there is a meaning to it and the action supports it. However, you may never use cross tokens you acquired in the same action. For example, if this 2 multiplier was placed in this card, it means that I can perform this action twice. So if I gain cross tokens during the first action, I can use them in the second one of my turn. Otherwise, these tokens may be used in following turns. Cross tokens are very important, but you can only have up to 5. After the player completes performing the action, the card is moved to the first space, sliding the other cards to the right. Now it's the next player's turn. Very important, when players select an action, they must perform it. However, players have one more option. As their turn, they can simply select an action card, move it to the start, sliding the other cards to the right, without performing the action, and simply gain 1 cross token from the supply. Also, there are 4 different ways in the game that the player can flip one of their action cards to the other side, which depicts an upgraded version of the action. Since there are only 4 ways, the player can upgrade a maximum of 4 cards. And which are these 4 ways? One is by gaining the second partner zoo, another is by gaining the second university, the third is by reaching space 5 on the reputation track, and the last one is by reaching space 2 in the conservation track. Conservation spaces 2, 5 and 8 offer the players with a choice of an instant bonus. In general, wherever you see these yellow pentagons, it means an instant one-time bonus. So when the player reaches space 2 of the conservation track, they can choose to upgrade one of their cards or gain another assistant. Of course, I cannot explain every single symbol in the game, but there is a very handy player aid in the box that explains everything and you can use it as a reference during the game. It's worth saying that during setup all players gain 2 scorecards. These cards hold objectives so that players gain more conservation points during scoring. However, players will use only one of these cards. Once a player reaches space 10 of the conservation track, then all players will have to decide one card to use during scoring and one to discard. If no player reached this space until scoring, then players will decide which one to score during scoring. Let's now do a quick overview of the 5 actions. With the cards action, the player gains new cards either from the board or from the deck. There are 3 different types of cards in the game. We have yellow banner cards, which are animal cards and they usually increase your appeal. We have blue banner cards, which are sponsor cards, and they do all sorts of things. And finally we have green cards, which are projects, which mainly increase your conservation. With the animals action, you play animal cards in your play area. Play of these cards always require a specific type of enclosure. So with the build action, you can add all sorts of buildings in your zoo. With the sponsors action, the player can play sponsor cards into their play area. Finally, with the association action, the player can use their assistants to perform an association task depicted on the board, and with this specific one, the player can support an initial project or play a project from their hand into these spaces here. Now let's see all of the actions in greater detail. Let's start with the cards action, with which the player adds new cards to their hand. To start with, the cards action depicts break 2. What that means is that whenever performed, the player must forward the break marker 2 spaces to the left. As you can see, depending on the action's power, the player draws a certain amount of cards and then maybe discards one card as well. With a level 1 cards action, all of the cards are drawn from the top of the deck. For example, with a power of 3, the player draws 2 cards from the top of the deck and adds them to their hand. Then the player must also discard 1 card, which can be any of the cards, and not only one from the cards just drawn. Players have a hand limit of 3 cards, but they can exceed this number, as this limit is only applied in the first step of the break process. If the card's power is 5, then instead of drawing and discarding cards, the player can also snap 1 card. When snapping a card, the player can gain any face-up card from the 6 spaces on the board. So for example, I could gain this card. Empty spaces on the board are always replenished at the end of the facing player's turn. When that happens, you shift all cards to the left and you fill empty spaces from the top of the deck. After the card's action card is upgraded, you can easily see that the player can gain more cards, or even snap a card starting with a power of 3 and not just 5. When the card's action is upgraded, the player can also draw cards within the reputation range. The reputation range of a player is determined by the player's marker on the reputation track. So the yellow player standing on the 9th space of the reputation track has the first 4 cards within their reputation range. So if the yellow player had to draw 3 cards, they can draw, for example, 1 card from the top of the deck, this card, and then that card as well. Let's move to the build action. With a level 1 build action, a player can build only 1 building with a maximum size equal to the power of the action. For example, with a 4 power action, I could build any one of the buildings I show you here in the graphics. All new buildings have to be constructed adjacent to at least 1 other building in your zoo. And if you have no other building, then you would need to construct it with at least 1 space adjacent to the border of the zoo map. The cost in money of building is equal to 2 money per each hexagon you cover. So for this placement, I would have to pay 6 money. Some placement rules now. You may never cover a mountain, a sea hex, other tiles, exceed the boundaries of the zoo, or cover these hexes until you have upgraded the build's action to level 2. As depicted here, kiosks must have a distance of at least 3 hexes between them. Kiosks award players with additional income in the break phase, so we will talk more about that later on. Pavilions, on the other hand, can be built anywhere and they instantly grant the player 1 appeal point. Standard buildings that have an empty and a full side are always placed on their empty side. The petting zoo has no empty and full side, but depicts spaces for cubes on it. You can place it with any side facing upwards. Important, you can only have 1 petting zoo in your zoo. Last but not least, if you cover 1 or more of these instant bonuses depicted on your map, you immediately gain these bonuses. Gain a new assistant, a cross token, 5 money, 2 moves in the reputation track, or 1 card from the board which is within your reputation range. Upgrading the build card to level 2 grants you with the following advantages. Most importantly, you can now build multiple buildings with the same action. All buildings must be different and their total size must be equal or less than the power of the action. Secondly, you can also now construct a reptile house or a bird aviary. These again have spaces like the petting zoo, but you can build more than one in your zoo. After you construct any of these two enclosures, if you have any animals already played in your play area that could survive in such an enclosure, you may move them immediately at that point. I will explain this with an example. In previous turns I have played two animals in my play area that currently live in these two full enclosures. Which exactly animal lives in which enclosure is inapplicable. Then, in my current turn, I construct a reptile house here. The anaconda can exist in the reptile house, so I can move it immediately after building it. The number inside the symbol means that I have to take one of my cubes and place it anywhere in the reptile house. Since I just moved the anaconda there, I have to free one of my other enclosures that satisfy the placement requirements of the card. In this case, I must free a standard enclosure that is at least of a size 2 and is adjacent to water. I have two such enclosures in my zoo that satisfy this rule. In that case, I must free the smallest one. This move can only happen now and never later. Finishing with the build action, if you manage to completely cover all of your zoo map, you instantly gain 7 appeal points. With the animals action, depending on the power, you can play one or more animal cards from your hand into your play area. If you play more than one card, then you complete playing one card before starting with the second. Here, with a power of 2, I could play one card. I would like to play the Nile crocodile, for example. In the top right corner of the card, you see all attributes of the animal. In this example, the Nile crocodile is a reptile animal which originates from Africa. To play an animal card, you must satisfy all requirements that are depicted in the top and left area of the card. Starting from the top, we see the enclosure requirement for this animal. The crocodile must use an empty enclosure which is of at least this size. This illustration here means that the enclosure must be adjacent to at least one water hex. I have such an enclosure here, so I could use it. Alternatively, the crocodile could move to a reptile house that has at least 3 empty spaces. Next we see the money cost of adding this animal to our zoo, which is 13, and I cover it. Next we see attribute requirements that must exist in our already played cards. The attributes of the crocodile itself, of course, do not count. Fortunately, I have 3 reptile attributes already played, so I satisfy all requirements to play this card. I choose to use my 5-size enclosure to put my crocodile, so I flip it over, I pay 13 money to the supply, and then I add the card into my play area like that. After playing the card, the player gains all the bonuses depicted in the bottom right corner of the card. Here it is 9 appeal points. Finally, the effect of the card is performed, which here is to snap 2 cards. Also, this special snapping enables the player to replenish the board between the 2 snaps. Of course, I cannot explain all the various requirements that cards may have. I hope you have an idea now of how to play a card. Also, some of the cards have these symbols illustrated. These relate to an effect that adds more interaction between the players. If you agree in advance that you don't want to play with such interaction, then instead of performing the normal white effect, you perform the blue effect here. After upgrading the animals card to level 2, you can also play cards straight from the board into your play area. The card must be within your reputation range, and you must also add to the money cost the number depicted here on the space where you took the card from. So I could play this card by spending 13 money, which I have, but I must also satisfy all the rest of requirements on the card, and unfortunately I do not have the 2 required bird attributes in my play area. Finally, some of the cards require you to have the animals card upgraded in order to be played. Moving now to the sponsors action, which enables players to play one sponsor card from their hand and into their play area, provided that the power of the action is equal or greater than the power requirement depicted in the top left corner of the card. This card also requires the player to have reached space 3 of the reputation track. Alternatively, instead of playing a sponsor's card, a player can break X where X is equal to the power of the action and then gain that many money from the supply. Let's see now what you gain after playing a sponsor's card into your play area. The yellow area shows bonuses that you gain instantly after placing the card into your play area. In our example, the player places the depicted special building into their zoo for free, but as it's written, it has to be placed next to at least 2 water spaces. And as you can see on the card, it is a requirement in order to play this sponsor card. So if there is no valid placement, then you cannot play this card at all. Blue areas on the card, and explained by blue bullets, relates to permanent effects that the player gains until the end of the game. This one says that from now on, each time you play a water icon into your zoo, you gain 2 appeal points. Important! Water icons on the card also apply, so the player will instantly gain 4 appeal points. Bonuses depicted with brown background relate to endgame scoring bonuses. Finally, bonuses depicted with purple background relate to income bonuses that apply during the break process. After upgrading the sponsor's action to level 2, the player can play multiple sponsors cards during their turn, with a total power requirement equal or less than the power of the action plus 1. The player can also now play cards either from their hand or from within their reputation range, paying the number of the space in money as an additional cost. Alternatively, if the player chooses to break, they take in money 2 times the power of the action. So with a power of 5, you break 5 and gain 10 money. Finally, with the association action, the player interacts with the blue area of the association board. The player must spend 1 available assistant from their notepad to 1 of the association tasks that requires power equal or less than the power of the action. If the selected task already holds 1 of the player's assistants, the player must use another 2 of their assistants in order to re-perform this task. Players start with only 1 available assistant, but with bonuses such as this, they can gain more assistants. Whenever you gain an assistant, you take the next assistant from the bottom and place it onto your notepad. The player also gains any instant bonuses revealed. If the player already has 3 assistants on a specific task, then the player cannot reuse the same task until the assistants have been reset back to the notepad, which happens during the break. Now let's see each one of these tasks. With the first task, the player increases their reputation by 2 steps. With the second task, the player takes 1 of the available partner zoos from the association board and places it on the next empty space on their personal board, moving from bottom to top. The player also gains instant bonuses covered this way. Also, players can never take a partner zoo they already have in their board. The -3 depicted here reminds players that from now on, whenever they play a card from a continent of which they have a partner zoo on their board, they will be getting a discount of 3 money. Also, some animal cards require you to have a partner zoo of the continent of the animal, so I could not play this card now. With the next task, the player takes 1 of the universities, again placing it in the next empty space starting from the bottom and gaining all covered bonuses. Again, players can never take the same university twice. Universities grant instant increase in your reputation, research symbols, which are also a requirement in some of the animal cards, and this specific university increases the player's hand from 3 to 5 cards. With the last task, the player can support any project below or above the association task, or play and support a new project card to the leftmost space above the board, shifting all other cards to the right. The active spaces above the board depend on the number of players. This is only used in a 3-players game, and this is only used in a 4-players game. So the next time a player places another project above the board, this card will be discarded and all cubes will return to the player's personal supplies. To support a project, either old or a new one just played, you must satisfy the requirement depicted on it. I have just played this aquatic project, which requires water icons in your zoo. I currently have 5 water icons, so here we can see that I satisfy the highest level of the card. The player then chooses any cube from the left part of their zoo and place it on top of the level just satisfied and instantly gains the bonus depicted below. Players also gain the bonus depicted from the space where they took the cube from. The bottom 3 bonuses are executed only once and immediately. The top 4, however, will be executed immediately, as well as in every future break. Finally, a player can never resupport a project with their cubes on, but other players can. Upgrading the association action to the next level enables the player to perform multiple tasks, which must be different. The total power of the tasks must be equal or less than the power of the action. On top of that, a player can make 1 donation after performing at least 1 task. The player places one of their cubes from their supply onto any donation space with no other cubes on, pays the money cost and gains 1 conservation point. The last donation space with the 12 money cost is never covered and players can always select it. Also, players can now play conservation project cards straight from the board from within their reputation range, again paying an additional cost equal to the number depicted on the space. Finally, you can only gain a 3rd or a 4th partner zoo after you have upgraded the association action to the 2nd level. A player who moves the break token to the end of the track gains a cross token and triggers a break at the end of their turn. During the break, all players first discard all cards from their hand which are in excess of their limit. Next, all players remove all tokens that might exist on their action cards back to the general supply. Then, all assistants on the association board return to their owner's notepad. Next, you replenish all missing components on the association board. Then you discard the cards on spaces 1 and 2, and you replenish the board as normal. Next, players receive income. Base income is determined by the player's appeal marker on the track, so here the blue player will gain 21 money. Next, players gain money for their kiosks. Each kiosk grants the owner 1 money for every building which is adjacent to the kiosk, except non-standard buildings on their empty side. Next, players receive all the bonuses on the empty purple spaces on the left side of their board. Finally, players receive bonuses granted from their played sponsors card. As the last step, the break marker returns back to the initial position depending on the player count. The game then continues as normal with the next player's turn. After any player's conservation and appeal markers meet or overlap, the game's end is triggered. If that happens during a player's turn, then all other players will take 1 more turn before we move to scoring. If that happened during a break, then all players will have 1 last turn. In scoring, players first reveal their scorecards. This one grants its owner conservation points depending on the player's position on the reputation track. With 11 reputation, the player scores 2 conservation points and moves the marker accordingly. Next, if the player's played sponsor cards have this brown stripe depicted in the top left corner, it means they contain an endgame scoring bonus, so you reveal them and score them if applicable. Finally, subtract the lowest appeal value from the reached conservation level from the reached appeal value, and that will be your score. The player with the highest score is the winner of the game. In case of a tie, the tied player who supported the most projects is the winner of the game. If the tie still exists, all tied players share their victory. And that were the rules of the great Ark Nova. If you like our videos and want to see more, please subscribe to our channel. And until next time, Merry Christmas and play more board games!